Hello everyone, and welcome to the Panasas webinar on industry-leading ease of use entitled Management at Scale, Simplifying Scale-Out NAS Administration. This is the third in our series of 3 events designed to extol the virtues of Panasas storage, namely scalability, reliability, and ease of use. All 3 webinars will be posted on our partner portal and website. Actually, the first 2 are already online for your viewing already, and this one will be posted later this week. My name's Phil Crocker. I'm the Director of Channel Marketing and Customer Enablement at Panasas. Today's presenter is Dale Brantly, Senior Systems Engineering Manager at Panasas and a veteran of the storage industry. Dale is well versed with both commercial and federal customer technical environments. And Dale will talk about the advantages of the active store design and why over 500 customers consistently rate us with top customer satisfaction ratings for ease of use. And you can find these ratings documented on our website through our Tech Validate research. So, a few housekeeping things before we get started. The presentation will last about 40 to 45 minutes. Afterwards, we've allocated some time for Q&A. Your phones are muted during the presentation and Q&A, and you're able to submit your questions anytime during the presentation by using the GoToMeeting questions interface. And we'll address questions at the end. Feel free to email Dale, myself, or anyone else on the Panasas team with any other questions you have subsequently. I will now turn it over to Dale Brantly. Dale, take it away, please.
Thank you, Phil. This morning I'd like to talk about how the Panasas defines management at scale. We're going to delve into the architecture a little bit, as well as its hardware components. We'll then discuss some of the administrative interfaces and how some of these interfaces can be used to perform the normal administrative functions. Panasas Active Store defines the management at scale by delivering a scalable solution that is easy to use, easy to deploy, and easy to manage. The storage solution provides a single global namespace, seamless no downtime linear performance scaling, and support of a very large number of concurrent users and data files, all in a very easy to use management environment. The Active Store platform architecture provides a high performance parallel I/O where all clients have direct access to the storage, a scalable client-side RAID engine, which provides dynamic scalability in both client performance and storage performance. The building block of the Panasas Active Store appliances is referred to as a shelf enclosure. The shelf is 4U high, 26 inches deep, and weighs approximately 150 pounds when fully loaded. Each shelf contains dual redundant power supplies, dual redundant network switches, a shelf battery with fans which is used to provide an orderly shutdown in the event of complete power loss. In addition, some combination of director and storage nodes. We have various models of the storage nodes. The memory in the storage node can be from 12 gigabytes to 48 gigabytes of RAM. It has a Xeon processor, has dual 1 gig and dual 10 gig NICs. The main purposes of the director nodes are realm management, file system metadata management, and provide gateway services such as NFS, SMB, CIFS, and NDP services. The storage node contains 2 disk drives of various densities. Today we have 4, 6, and 8 terabyte. Each storage node also has an SSD of 240 to 480 gigabytes, and also has a large amount of cache from 8 to 16 gigabytes, a Xeon processor, and dual 1 gig NICs. The main purpose, the main functions of the storage nodes is data management, which is actually performing the physical I/O, determining the proper placement of the objects. For instance, metadata objects and files less than 60K will automatically reside on the SSD, whereas all files, other files will reside on the spinning drives. The storage node also implements snapshots and also maintains security and data integrity One of the instances for data integrity is each storage node performs its own background data integrity verification. The Panactive Manager is a simple, easy-to-use web interface GUI which provides full administrative capability as well as an optional read-only guest access. On each page is the system status. One of the features that I really like is the current documentation is just a link away. This is actually part of the each software release, so you don't have to go back to the vendor's website and find the particular versions of a manual. You can actually just click there. It brings up a PDF right on your browser. Provide a high-level view of the performance and load, the current capacity and usage. We have a number of hardware of tabs across the top for navigation to different components of the Pan Manager. And finally, a legend giving ideas of what the current various states of the icons are. If we drill down into the hardware tab, we'll see on the left side that there's a set of menus. These menus will expand based off of what tab you're on. You can drill down into them. In this case, we're in the hardware tab. And we can see the actual representation of the front of one of the Panasas shelves. If we then select on shelf 1 in this case to drill down into that shelf, we will actually see both the front representation and the rear representation of the shelf. And note the details on the right-hand side. The integrated shelf switches actually do have small green dots that represent the uplinks for those particular network switches. Another feature of Panasas is the ease of expansion and technology migration. The ease of expansion provides a no interruption capacity and performance capability that allows your customer to continue production environment. Basically, we come in, we rack and cable the additional shelves, we add the shelves to an existing blade set or create a new one, and automatically in background, the existing objects are actually moved to the new storage. So load leveling the capacity of each of the shelves that are already in the system. In addition to ease of expansion, we have what's called technology migration. Technology migration provides the ability to introduce and use new active store models without incurring any downtime. Say we have 4 terabyte drives today, we move to 8 tomorrow. We can actually create an environment such that we can introduce the new shelves into the customer's environment and in the background transparently move the data from the older technology shelves to the newer technology shelves. This is a big gain for the customer. He doesn't have to take that long outage. There is no forklift upgrade to actually move to newer technology. As an example of expansion, we select the Add Storage. We select the expansion. In this case, we want to expand the existing blade set. We can also increase the number of spares if that's appropriate. We select a shelf to be added, and then we click Add Storage to Blade Set. And lo and behold, the storage has been added. Note our capacity has now almost doubled. We're at now 83.31 terabytes. From the client side, beforehand we had, this is a standard DF command, the file system was 31 terabytes. After the expansion, we're now at 69 terabytes. This is without interruption. We just added more capacity and performance to the environment. A big gain for the customers. Jobs don't know about it. We don't have to stop at queues. Customers are happy. Another feature of Panasas Panactive Manager is the volume management. We provide the capability of doing volume creation and deletion. Optional, each of these volumes can actually have a maximum size, or they can be left to expand to the size of the blade set. We can provide custom permissions and default stripe geometry, and we can also select the appropriate RAID level. In some cases, you may want RAID 5, some cases you may have RAID 6, or even RAID 1.0. These are all selectable. As an example of volume creation, we select Create Volume. From the Storage tab, we enter the name of the volume, select the appropriate RAID object. We can also select permissions, the volume size, and stripe topology. Then we would select Create Volume again, and the volume is now created, and you can see that is online. Notifications, another feature of PanActive Manager is we have a number of notification capability. We have a customizable email notification system, which issues emails and alerts for system issues, quote events, and things of that nature. We also have the capability of a customized periodic email, which basically sends the status of the environment, capacities, performance of that nature, things of that nature. We support SNMP v1 MIBs, and we actually supply those MIBs as part of the release. We also provide AWOL client notification for those clients that might hang or go away with active PanFS file systems mounted. This is usually an indication that the client has crashed of some nature, so we want to alert the customer or the administrator that something is indeed amiss. We also support remote syslog, as well as a read-only XML interface. And this interface is typically used by customers rolling their own NAJOS or cacti monitoring environments. In this case, it would be common for an operations group to have a monitor set up with performance monitoring or disk drive monitoring or temperature monitoring, within the operations enclosure. Another feature of PanActive Manager is snapshots. A snapshot is a read-only copy of all the files and directories within a volume at a particular time. We can schedule these snapshots on an hourly, daily, or weekly basis, but they can also be created on demand. The access from the user standpoint is via the snapshot directory. Inside the snapshot directory will actually be a directory structure of each of the snapshots associated with that volume. So you may have a snapshot / Monday / Tuesday / Wednesday for each of those daily snapshots. The user can actually go down into those and look at what files were there originally, or actually copy those out to a different destination. We also provide the capability of doing automatic deletions of snapshots when the blade set becomes low on space. You want to be able to maintain the ability for customers to continue using their storage, and typically snapshots may be one of the first things you want to get rid of when space becomes low. A unique feature of Panasas is a client-side utility referred to as PanSnap Delta. PanSnap Delta compares the differences between two snapshots and provides essentially a list of files and directories which have been changed between those two snapshots. We can use this list of files as actually an input to an incremental backup application. What this allows us to do is prevent the backup applications from doing incremental, actually doing a total recursion of the directory tree looking for files that have been changed. This is a big speed advantage. For example of snapshots, you select snapshots from the Storage tab, select Schedule. Then from the Schedule tab, we can actually put in a tag. I just put Wednesday in there, or WWD. I said, 2100 every day, maximum to keep. So whatever schedule you would like, based off whatever this particular volume is. For home file systems, you may want to have more often. For opt or user local, maybe a lot less often, since those would not change as much. You submit, and all of a sudden the snapshot is scheduled. Again, you can also schedule, but you can also do on-demand snapshots. The second primary interface to PanActive Manager is the command line interface referred to as pancli. Pancli access is via SSH or a serial connection onto the storage node or the director node. As with the web UI, we actually have full rights administrative access and optional limited read-only guest access. The pancli supports the BT100 command line editing, as well as standard Unix shell types, patterns, output redirections, things of that nature. Each of the commands within pancli command line commands actually do have a context level help. For instance, you can say bladeset list ? And it will give you the options at that point in the command. This interface is also scriptable, which can be used to simplify often used administrative functions or even more complex functions that you typically use on a more often basis. Some examples of the PLI are, in this case, I have I'm getting the temperatures of the director blades with sysmap temp, with pipe it to a grep, normal things. Looking at the blade sets, we can see that this blade set has 20 OSDs, which are storage nodes. It has 2 spares, and the capacity is 83 terabytes. Some additional options are volume list, sysmap. There's about 120 different commands which interface into the operating environment that the operations person or a guest access can use. So the key takeaways: Panasas Active Store Management at scale simplified. So what we mean by this is that whether you have 1 shelf, 50 shelves, or 100 shelves, the level of effort is the same. This is a one interface, user interface, either web interface or CLI, which manages the entire environment. Management at scale lowers the cost of efforts of administration. We do not have to have, as we scale the system up, we do not have to have increased administrative personnel managing the environment. We have customers who have tens of petabytes with a part-time system administrator. It's not a function, cost of administration is not a function of capacity. We also provide no downtime capacity performance expansions. This is a big win for customers who continue with Panasas. They want to expand their current environment without interrupting their workload. The key is to keeping the system up, keeping it operational, keeping their users happy. And finally, technology migration. This technology changes every year. New, faster, more dense drives are available every year. And with technology migration, we can leverage the internals of PanActive Manager to move data from the older technology data shelves to the newer technology shelves, keeping the customer's environment alive, keeping the customer's jobs running in background. Thank you. Phil?
Great. Thanks, Dale. That's terrific. Really appreciate your time taking us through that. So what I'd like to do is this. I see we have a question from Scott already in the question section. So we'll come to that in just a minute. Give folks a moment to catch breath. And if you have other questions, please do put them into that question tab. I have a couple of things that occurred to me both today and earlier in the week when we were chatting about this session. And one is, how easy, Dale, is it to set Active Store up? How long does it usually take you or the SE team to do an installation? What's it typically like?
So we put a lot of emphasis on upfront planning. We have a document called a site survey, which we fill out with a customer, describing such things as DNS servers, IP address ranges, net masks, those type of things. It's just the 50 core questions that we need to have answered before we can actually sit down and, on the console and start typing. Once we have this information, we typically show up. Our typical deployment is 2 or 3 shelves. We'll show up 9 o'clock in the morning. We'll rack and stack, power up, configure the system, upgrade the system as required. We typically go out to lunch at noon. We'll come back and do a knowledge transfer. So for a moderate size, small to moderate size installation, it's a day. We typically come in the night before and fly out the late afternoon or evening.
My impression is that a lot of the time in larger installations is just a physical process of unpacking the boxes and racking the gear. The implementation of the file system doesn't take too long. Is that a reasonable view? Or?
Yes, that's actually very reasonable. The physical work is probably 2x as long as the logical work. Getting boxes in, getting boxes out. Each Panasas shelf is actually shipped in 2 different boxes, so there are some parts that have to be assembled. Getting the rack set, getting power straight. Those physical entities actually take a majority of the time.
Right. Okay. And it just reminds me as well, something that folks listening in might be interested in, on that note, is we just posted on YouTube and on our website an out-of-the-box experience video that was run by Kevin and some of his team in the post-sales area. And you might be just interested. It gives you a good flavor of what it's like when you receive the boxes all the way through to installing the product. So definitely worth a look. So a couple other things. So, I mean, I mentioned up front, our world-class customer satisfaction ratings. And I have to say, when I joined the company, I was blown away. I mean, I hadn't seen anything like it. I mean, what's your experience? You've worked around the industry. How does it compare to other places you've worked in terms of how customers really enjoy working with the product?
I have, like you mentioned, I've worked at a number of other companies who have, very highly rated customer service organizations. But I have to say with Panasas, it's different. With Panasas, the TSEs are dedicated to resolving the issue that the customer's seeing, or just answering the questions. They take it personally to get the answer necessary or the solution developed. It's really refreshing to see that kind of desire to allow the customer to succeed in what they're doing. Success on the customer standpoint reflects upon Panasas, so we're all successful together.
Right, and I guess that's reflected in the number of testimonials and references. Again, I was very pleasantly, not surprised, but very happy to see so many customers stepping up and wanting to talk about how great their experience was, and most importantly, how we helped them solve big challenges in their world without worrying about their storage environment. Okay, so one of the things that did cross my mind, you were talking about snapshots, and from my time in storage, there's some overhead in snapshotting, and you talked about like rolling forward snapshots and deleting old ones. Can you kind of tell everyone a bit about what the overhead is for snapshots and what the best policies are around managing them?
Absolutely. So Panasas, on the back end, Panasas is an object-oriented file system. The only thing that's stored on a storage blade are objects. So when we talk about snapshots, we don't have to replicate data as a normal block RAID controller would. All we do is actually make an extra pointer to the metadata. So the snapshot image doesn't really replicate data, it actually just replicates metadata. So it creates a much faster, more compact, less space consuming snapshot image. And as far as best policy, it really depends on what the environment, the volume use is. As I mentioned, a home file system or home volume may have more snapshots more often, whereas more static volumes would have less snapshots.
Got it. Okay, that's really helpful. So Scott's question here. So maybe you see it in the Q&A panel. His question is, when is a higher speed interface slated to appear in the product? And then he cites 40 gigabit Ethernet, 100 gigabit Ethernet, Omnipath, InfiniBand, etc. Can you share anything of some of the features of the product?
So from what I understand, in the next director in our next product will be capable of either 40 gig or 100 gigabit Ethernet. I'm not sure if a decision has been made on what that will be. We're still some months away from that final decision.
Okay, all right. I know that futures is a tough one, but I thought we'd give it a shot anyway. And Scott, maybe what we need to do is arrange for some product futures for you. So I've made a note of that, seeing as you seem to be pretty interested in that. So a couple more things that cross my mind. I mean, it's always very powerful, and going through this presentation and taking a look at the GUI. I mean, that's a very strong selling tool for us, and it's great for customers to see that ahead of buying anything from us. So for folks on the call, if they want to see a demo or have someone walk them through it, how do you deal with that in the field? Do you do something like this? Is there a place they can log on? What's the best protocol to actually show people the GUI?
So I've actually gone through a couple mechanisms. In some case, we can provide obviously a proof of concept system if it's appropriate. We also have a complete storage environment in a sandbox that's accessible to the outside world. Where a customer can come in or a partner can come in and actually run jobs, exercise with the user interface, both the GUI and the CLI. It's a total interface that's available to our partners. We've used that. I've also, in some cases, just set up WebExes and let the customer steer. I have to admit, I grew up in serial modem days, and so I'm very used to a CLI. However, the PanActive Manager user interface, the web interface, provides a very quick and easy mechanism to get your job done. And I find myself using the web interface probably 80% of the time, because it does everything for you.
Right. Yeah. It was an eye-opener for me, I have to say, seeing how comprehensive what the offer is. So hey, there's another question here, again from Scott. Thank you, Scott. Does the snapshot feature help recall files after files have been aged and sent off to tape or other long-term storage? So he's talking a bit about tiered storage here, I guess.
So I'm not sure if I understand the full question, but since we don't provide any tiering, the snapshot would actually contain the file as it was at the time of that snapshot was created. Okay,
so does that mean that that you have to set up your own job around archiving snapshots? So how do you actually deal with snapshots? I think it's how do you age them and then move them.
Okay. From a backup perspective. From a backup perspective, there are a couple of ways that can be done. We have customers that are using snapshots as essentially mounting this, or using the snapshot as the mount point of the backup. This certainly is a very typical way that backups are performed. For instance, the backup application is given the .snapshot directory that was made 9 o'clock last night, and it will actually back up that component. From that point, it's up to you to delete the snapshot or leave it there and let it age off.
Okay, hopefully that answers your question, Scott. If not, keep pinging the next level question into us either now or afterwards. So I just have one more that I was intrigued about, and it was when you were talking about, well, two things actually. One is you talked about adding capacity, and I know in some systems in the market you have to kind of stop things and then you add capacity, then you can start again. Is there any kind of stop moment, or do you have to reconfigure files when you add capacity, or is it simpler than that?
It's simpler. There is no file creation. There's nothing that has to be changed. There's no remapping or any of those things. Essentially, the system administrator does the expand, adds the storage, just as we did in the example, and the file system is automatically larger. There is no pause of jobs. There is no pause of I/O.
Yeah.
Everything just continues. It's a very neat. Very few vendors have this capability.
Right. So from the user's point of view, they see the capacity increase and there's no interruption at all. So the user experience is just, oh, my Z drive notionally just got bigger.
Absolutely. So now we just double the space or triple the space that's available out there. Now he may not have access to all of it because the system administrator said, this is a separate volume, or it may be a separate blade set. But the key feature is that we can add to existing environments without having to take any downtime. The other piece of it, and maybe I didn't emphasize it, is that with a parallel architecture of Panasas, we want to be able to move the data around to as many targets as possible. When we do this expansion, in background, a process starts to actually move objects off of the full, older existing shelves onto the new shelves. So whereas you may be at 80% full on your one shelf, and then you add another shelf, that 80% will shrink down to 40%, and 40% would be load level across the two shelves. So this allows twice as many I/O targets, which increases the bandwidth of the environment.
Okay, got it. Terrific. So, hey, Richard, thanks for your question, which I see just came in. Is there support for volume reduction, for example, removing a physical chassis with a live system? So I guess this may be about removing older technology and recycling to newer technology is kind of the volume reduction piece.
So in the case where we do a technology migration is actually done on a shelf-by-shelf basis. So if we have 3 shelves of 4 terabyte drives and we move to 3 shelves, we have to move to 3 shelves of 8 terabyte drives. We can't go from 3 shelves of 4 to 2 shelves of 8. And basically the reason for that is because of the fact that all files are striped within Panasas environment.
Okay, and then maybe I'm misunderstanding. So when he talks about support for volume reduction, how would you read that? What?
So volume reduction, we don't provide in a case where nothing has changed. We do not provide. Well, I guess starting out, a volume doesn't have a fixed size.
Yeah.
If we create a volume today that you say has a maximum growth of, say, 30 terabytes, and we want to reduce that 30 terabytes to 20 terabytes, we can certainly do that as long as the volume contents isn't, greater than 20 terabytes. So we can, you can think of it as soft film thin provisioning, in that we can move the number as long as the contents of the volume is less than what we're moving it down to.
Okay, got it. So, okay. All right, so he says correct. I was thinking of a chassis internal disk upgrade. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Richard. Okay, so from me, I had just one other question, again, which occurred to me while you were going through the deck again today. So I was thinking about, obviously the system administration and rights with Pan Manager. What about the remote view only utility? How does that get used? What's a typical environment where someone would have kind of look only, no change the configuration rights?
That's a good question, and it's sort of hard to grasp. But in 2 cases where I have used it, in my case where I had a customer who wanted to ask me about something, where I wanted to get in and actually look at the web interface and the CLI, but their policy said I can't change anything. So the way they enforce that policy is by granting me guest access. So I can go in, I can look at performance numbers, I can look at logs, I can look at various aspects of a system, but I can't modify anything.
Right, so it gives you insight to be able to then go back, and then they can kind of act on your advice, or then invite you in to modify or whatever. So it gives
Correct.
you a view.
And the second variation of that is that in a lot of cases, larger data centers have dedicated operations staff, but the operations staff aren't the system administrators. So in this case, the operations staff could have guest access, and they can look at all of the alerts, they can respond to alerts and things of that nature, but they can't make changes to the environment.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. Well, hey, I think we're pretty well getting to a close here. So thank you, Dale, for a very enlightening presentation. I found it very useful, and judging by the questions, I think our audience did as well. I would just encourage folks to, if you have more questions, we do have some email capabilities. So for the partner community, we have partnertech@panasas.com, which accesses our SE team, and our customers also have the ability to come into post-sale support, of course, to be able to gain help. As you can tell from what we've said already, a number of them do that, and they like it very much. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Dale. Thank you, the back office team, and everyone for joining today. And look forward to seeing you on the next occasion. We do have some other upcoming webinars before the end of the year.
Today we're going to show the simple steps required to install a Panasas storage appliance into an industry standard rack. Here's a quick look at what it will look like at the very end. We'll start off by installing into this empty rack. First, we'll remove the power strips on each side, and then we'll begin the installation shortly after that. We start by opening the boxes we received on our pallet. The taller of the two boxes on top is what we refer to as the foundation kit, and contains everything except the blades. The shorter box underneath on the bottom contains the blades. As you will see, items come out of the box in the same order in which you would install them. Installation starts at the top of the foundation box. Open it up and you'll see two rear rail components, a bag of screws, cage nuts, a screwdriver, and a 2-meter twin-X cable used to connect the front panel ports of the director blade to the pass-through ports on the shelf switches. Once we've removed the top insert, the next layer down contains the shelf enclosure. We'll take the shelf enclosure out and remove the outer plastic wrap and any additional packaging, and then remove the foam inserts which might be in the shelf bays. Foam inserts may be shipped inside the enclosure bays to keep the air baffles from rattling while the box is being shipped. Back here, you'll notice the cover is on one of the switch slots. In this case, it is actually covering slot 1, though more typically it comes covering slot 2. An empty switch slot can be covered using this cover. Here you'll notice the guide rails slide into the slots in the rear of the enclosure. Because the guide rails can slide in this manner, installation can accommodate a wide range of rack depths, from 23 to 32 inches in length. Once we determine which 4U of space in the rack we will use to mount the shelf, we will install the cage nuts. There are 4 in the front and 4 in the rear, positioned like the diagram shows. Usually you can remember this as the front being the bottom of the top U and the top of the bottom U, while the rear is the top 2 of the bottom U. In our case, we have round holes in our rack and so do not need cage nuts. In the case of the standard square holes, you would use cage nuts. Once the cage nuts are installed, slide the shelf into position and have a helper hold up the rear of the shelf while the 4 screws are started in the front. Don't tighten them completely yet. And note the helper is only needed if there is nothing below the first shelf installed in the rack. Shelves after the first can rest on top of previous shelves as they are installed. In our case, we have a shelf that will hold our shelf enclosure up, so we slide it onto there, and one person can do this. Here we slide the left and the right rear guides and insert the screws and tighten. And here we finish tightening the screws in the back and then follow it with screwing in and tightening the screws in the front. Once we have the shelf enclosure installed and the screws tightened down, we remove the next insert to expose the next layer down in the foundation box. This layer contains the components for the rear of the shelf: 2 power supplies, a battery module, and 1 or 2 shelf switches, depending on the model. From this level of the foundation box, we will remove and unpack the shelf switch, as shown here from its packaging, and then we'll unpack the power supplies and the battery. Note the latch mechanism in the rear of the power supply. You will need to pull this out before you slide the power supply into the shelf. Once the power supply is flush with the enclosure, you can push the latch mechanism in to seat the power supply. The battery module has a similar latch mechanism in the back. When unpacking and installing the battery, be careful of the contacts as they are live. There should be a yellow warning tape across the contacts, which will need to be removed prior to sliding the battery into the shelf. Working from left to right in the rear of the chassis, install a power supply, then the battery, and then the second power supply. Once we finish this, we will discard the filler panel from the Net 2 slot. This panel is used to maintain shelf integrity during shipping. Now, being careful to avoid static discharge, remove the shelf switches from their static bags and insert them into the slots between the power supplies and the battery module. Note that while the 2 shelf switches are the same, one is installed inverted from the other. Once in place, tighten the thumb screws on the switches to secure them to the shelf. Note that the switch on the right, as viewed from the rear, is the Net 1 switch, and the one on the left is the Net 2 switch. Again, avoiding static discharge here, we install the second switch. This would be the Net 2 switch. As you can see again, it is installed upside down when compared with the other Net 1 switch. Also in this layer of the foundation kit are 2 power cords and a serial cable. Set the serial cable aside for now. It will be used for additional configuration covered in the next video. Attach the 2 power cords, one from each power supply, to the power supply at the site, and dress the cables appropriately to make them look good. The Twin X cables that were previously set aside should be placed and routed at this point. They can be connected to the shelf switches in the back, but left loose at this point in the front. It's important to note that the cable that will plug into the top director port should route to the Net 1 port 5, and the one for the bottom director blade port should route to the Net 2 port 5. One trick you can use is note that each cable has a label near one end. You can reverse one cable so that one of the two cables has a label on the front of the rack and one has a label on the back. That way you know to plug the one with a label into the top director blade port and the one without the label into the bottom director blade port on the front. On the back, the one with a label plugs into the net 2 port 5 and the one without plugs into net 1 port 5. To insert Twin-X cables, you push until you hear an audible click. To release them depends on the variety of Twin-X cable. In this case, you have one where you push the lever in, which then releases the Twin-X cable. Where there is a pull tab, you will actually have to pull the tab to release the Twin-X cable, and then it will come out easily. Now that we have the switches installed and the cables from front to back installed, we'll connect the cables from the customer's network into the port 6 sockets on each of the net 1 and net 2 switches as shown here. Now that we've finished the back, we'll turn the rack around and begin the focus on the front. And now that we're looking at the front, we'll focus on the second box, which is the one of lower height. We'll remove the foam here that stabilizes the blades during shipment. And then we will pull out one of the blades. As you'll find out, this particular blade is a storage blade as opposed to a director blade. We'll learn in another video the differences between the two. Of particular note, the storage blade does not have any networking ports on the front of it, just the main grill and the latch. Both director and storage blades have this latch, which allows the blade to be opened and pulled out of the shelf. This is a different blade we call a director blade. You'll note that it still has the latch for opening it and the serial port there, but it also has networking ports on the top of the blade and also has the same connector as the back on the storage blade. Working from left to right, we'll insert the blades. We'll start with the director blade, which you can tell by the presence of the networking ports as we mentioned. You push it in until it clicks and then you press the latch to close. Next, we'll insert the storage blades. Again, you can tell the difference because of the absence of the networking ports and the presence of the grill on top. Push the blade in until it clicks and then flip the latch to lock it in place. Once the director blade has been installed in slot 1, the Twin-X cables from the back can be connected. Using the strategy we mentioned earlier, where one of the cables is labeled at one end and the other end is not, the cable with the label end will go into the top port while the non-labeled Twin-X cable will go into the bottom port. You may, however, wish to defer this crossover connection until after the system is up and ready to be configured in order to minimize any issues when configuring the system as part of the customer's environment. For the serial cable connection, you can connect the serial cable as shown here into the front. Once we plug the power cables into the wall, we'll come back to the power supply units here and flip the toggle switch to the on position to power the units on. Once the power switches are on, you will want to pay attention to the LEDs. If power is working, you should see 3 green LEDs as shown. Finally, coming around to the front of the system, we simply make sure that there are no red LEDs on the blades in the front, and connectivity is indicated by flashing LEDs on the networking ports. And that concludes our installation of the Panasas appliance.